more viewers, more people to buy my magazine and newspaper. But the true role of media is simply what we do is we try to show you the most accurate picture that we can. But now politics takes a first seat to that, not a back seat. It takes a seat up front. And it's, if I get my money from mostly liberal organization, my view, and I'm going to promote a liberal agenda. So I'm going to tell the story from a liberal perspective. If I get majority of my income from conservative outlets, I'm going to tell the conservative point of view. Fox News is a great example of these entities. So I don't think the media plays a role, but we are only shedding light to what is going on in the world. So I don't think media is
The answer?
the answer. To me, it goes back to leadership, political leadership.
I think you've opened up a can of worms, and we can talk about this for a long time. I definitely want to cover some of what came up. Thank you very much, by the way. The main thing that came up in education, and Dr. Mack, in my mind's eye, was that the concern of parents about how kids are chosen for programs. How many kids, versus black kids are put in advanced programs, and their counterparts, their white counterparts. Thank you, Dr. Shaw. I'm telling you, I told them all. You're doing the summary. So. But the other part was people were concerned about discipline. That African Americans and brown kids are disciplined more sternly than Caucasian kids. And I want to hear what you believe is, first of all, is that fact or is that just perception? If it is fact, what do the general public and our communities need to do about it so that even kids have the same access to advanced programs or are disciplined in the same manner?
You know, one of the things that needs to take place is that in our community, you know, we need to be involved. We need to be involved. When we have an opportunity to school, that parking lot needs to be packed. It needs to be packed, and we have to help our parents, in a lot of cases, understand the higher expectations that they need to have for their kids. Some parents understand. It's no problem. You know, they get it, and they go into the school and they demand it. And they get it done. And then some had bad experiences when they were in school. And so what happens, they shy away from going in there because they had bad experiences. Or either they go in there and they just really cut up in that process. But what we have to do is we have to work with our parents and with our kids to not put ourselves in those situations. You know, unfortunately, you know, it doesn't take much to set us off. You know, and when we're set, we're gonna like the kids, we're gonna throw down. And when that happens, there's discipline for that particular situation. And you know, we have to understand some conflict management. And there are a lot of groups that are working with kids on that. Conflict management, how not to, you know, get physical to solve the problem. You know, because what I used to tell the kids when I was a principal, I said, hey, here's the deal. Two people fight. All you proved was who was the best fighter that day. You didn't sometimes prove who was right. The right person might have lost the fight. All you proved was who was the best fighter. So if that's your goal, then that's your goal. But if you want to prove that you were right, there's other ways of proving that you're right. And what we have to do is we have to put just as much emphasis on advanced placement as we put on athletics. we have to put just as much emphasis or more on advanced placement as we put on athletics. Because if there's an athletic event, and you can go to any park around this community, 7 o'clock Saturday morning, it's going to be packed. Parents going to be there, all 9 yards. But if you have a function at school, you might not have that same attendance requirement. So, everybody can't be an athlete and a rapper. Just can't be. You got a better chance of being a brain surgeon than making some of these pro football teams, or basketball teams. And we're going to have to get back in that focus, because that's the thing that carried our African American youth. I was talking to a group of gentlemen on the weekend. At one time in Savannah, we had 25 black doctors. We went down to 1. And then we had to have a recruitment effort to get more back into our community. But 25 at one time, because that's where the kids were going. Science, math, and that kind of thing. And we have to get back. Science, math, engineering, medicine, architecture, those areas that are going to really drive the economy and improve the communities. So, those are some of the things that we have to do, rather than, where we focus our attention.
I'm sorry, we have about 7 minutes, and I want to get Dr. Shaw in here. Dr. Shaw, at the political forum, one of the things that came up was South Carolina's inability or aversion to doing something about the Medicaid program. And accepting Medicaid funds. And that led into the discussion on political clout. And how do you, knowing that there is a need, how do you push the political agenda when it is clear, as it was pointed out, that there are poor whites, there are poor blacks, there are poor Hispanics, and expanding the Medicaid program doesn't just benefit blacks, it benefits people on the low end of the social economic scale. How do we get the political system to understand that there are people there that need help and get their attention? What have you seen in that?
Well, none of these questions are easy. And that's one of those, none of those questions that are easy. I would say that there are always some interesting dynamics that are going on, particularly within the South, but it's not just found within the South. One of those dynamics is, how do you make political coalitions that are economic coalitions that go across these racial divides? And that's an ongoing question in American history. In Southern history, that folk won't vote their economic interest, they'll vote what they perceive to be a racial interest. Or they may not even see it as a racial interest. They'll just simply say, I'm not for that party, I'm for this party. And I won't get into party dynamics, but if you look at who those candidates are endorsing, it's similar to get your government hands off my Medicare. It's a sense that there's a disconnect between what people are actually receiving and what they think they should vote for, and in the direction they should vote for. I think that it will take some candidates of vision on all sides to speak to what's really going on. I think, and I don't want to go too far afield of your question, but I will just say this, that some of these dynamics of what we're seeing in the presidential race were candidates who are not sort of the mainline candidates. So I'm not going to give endorsement to one or another candidate in the presidential race. But some of this argument about, why is there this fervor on one side for a Trump with the Republican race, or for Bernie Sanders with the Democratic race, they both seem to be sort of outsiders, insiders in some respects, but outsiders in other respects. And I think there is a general, there's this general sense that Americans from various sides are not trusting of those who are the insiders. They're not sort of trusting of of politics as usual. Now, where does that go in terms of this broader debate about how do you create these coalitions? There are times in American history where you have been able to get folk on the same page, but you had to figure out how did you pull back a race enough so that you could speak to people's economic interests. You know, whether we go more than 100 years ago with the progressive movement or elements of the populist movement. Unfortunately, at each turn, however, racism would creep in and divide. And folk would then say, no, you're not aligning with those folks, are you? So I think what we need to do, I think in some ways after a while, it will just simply become somewhat obvious that there are benefits to be gained from an expansion of a public program that fills in a clear hole. You know, in South Carolina, it's somewhere around that level of, if you're making not quite $11,000, and we know that's a wage that is difficult for a family, and that's a poverty wage. But if you're not quite making $11,000, you don't qualify. You're too poor to qualify. I think in some respects, if the experiment is working, and I think it will, there'll be some political pressure that will come to bear where folk will simply say, like a case of Ohio, it saves me money for the federal government to subsidize element of what we need to be done here. It's a good conservative principle for me to do it here because otherwise I'm sending those dollars to Washington or keeping those dollars in Washington, and I'm still, in my hospital system, my healthcare system, still has to figure out how to grapple with people who are in the economic situation that they're in, that they can't provide, for their own health care and their basic health insurance. When that moment comes, I'm not quite certain. And how long that will take, I'm not quite certain. It may be, and I'll say this, Ms. Baskins, in closing, it may be that to the degree that we make some recognition of where we stand in terms of race and race relations will have an impact on these economic questions. There are, at least I'll say, on the silver lining, my fellow citizens, and the silver lining is there is some recognition, according to polls, that Americans, white Americans, and some Southerners are mindful of the fact that there is discrimination. There's higher levels of discrimination, and that African Americans, just as one particular group, suffer from that discrimination, and those numbers are actually higher now than they were about 5 years ago. So folks are making some greater recognition. I would say also young people are making some greater recognition that there is a problem somewhere. Maybe these questions around police brutality, around these shootings, around these conflicts are bringing it and making it visible. And the fact that these things, that these smartphones, these cameras we have on our hip, that we can bring those out and show that what's happening has had some impact on the public debate. Maybe that will at some point redound to the fact of saying, well, why should race matter when this is an economic or universal benefit that all Americans could have? Again, I know I'm not connecting the dots here because there's a long gap between that over here and this occurring over there. But I just wanted to indicate to you some of what I see might be the prospects for that occurring.
Good. Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Shaw. Dr. Shaw is just coming in from Charleston, as I indicated to you earlier, and he got here just in time. Senator Scott. Now we have, I think our time is up, so if we could summarize, if you summarize.
I will just be very, very brief. The whole real discussion before the health care got its name changed from before the health care to Obamacare. The political party on the other side, the Republican Party, then made it an anti-progressive movement. And the Republican Party across this country adopted that concept only in those states where the governor could either be elected Democrat or Republican based on issues that some of the governors stepped out to get the 3-year money that was way better. South Carolina was so far back in terms of trying to make those changes as progressive people began to vote and push them out, made a political decision, and the governor said she was not going to accept a dual Medicaid waiver. So the net result, we really didn't care who it worked. The net fact, it was Obamacare. The real question was asked publicly on the street to a lady, do you support affordable health care? She said, yes, I do. Do do you afford Obamacare? She says,
No, I don't.
and so the real ignorance of really what the healthcare issue does. But South Carolina learned a tremendous lesson. When we went back and we really started tracking people who then came onto the roll, we would have done better accepting the money. We discovered we had more people who qualified for regular Medicaid, and we had no additional money to pay the bill.
To your point, I think that, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's just kind of a dollars and cents number as much as, fact as much as it is an equality issue. And I guess to your point, sir, about younger generations being more aware of that, what's the dynamics, I think you're absolutely right about that. And I guess my vision for public policy going forward in South Carolina as somebody who works in public policy is that we can have these conversations and say that we all can recognize the real issues that are there, but that doesn't mean that we necessarily agree on the solutions, but we have to give people of all sides the benefit of the doubt that they are coming to the discussion in good faith. I dare say, I think that, the Medicaid expansion to me is a question of how are we going to pay for it as a state when there's never going to be the federal match that was promised, when healthcare costs under the Affordable Care Act continue to go up. We have not seen a downward trend in the cost curve. So how are we going to address these issues and have conversations in a way that actually moves past the ill will and can recognize goodwill on both sides and say, let's have a discussion about facts and figures as opposed to motivations. So that's my dream for my state of South Carolina. I know that's a big dream, and why I'm here.
And we can get there.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things from the panel we've all discussed is that, we have come a ways since Tillman, but we still got a long way going. And we have to go across the aisle in making these things work. Republicans have to work with Democrats, blacks have to work with whites, the old people have to work with the young people, like the gentleman right there said. And that's true though. We all have to work together. And his point about not having maybe a more youthful person on the panel, it's a good point. I don't argue that point, but we have a ways to go before we sleep. And so as we think about it, what happens after this panel, as I said earlier, and we can't just have the panel and just stop right there. We have to take this panel and the information gathered and shared and move this community forward. We have the minds to do it. Do we have the will?
And I would say my vision for South Carolina in terms of public policy would be that sort of being able to strike that common sense balance of being able to come from the debate from differing sides, but ultimately being willing to create a consensus of, beyond an ideological point of view, what in fact makes sense for the greatest number of South Carolinians. I'll throw out here also this concept because I'm an educator, I try to figure out, well, how can I convey this concept? And I'll just say very briefly, there's a commentator, liberal commentator, but very thoughtful critic about questions of race by the name of Tim Wise. And Tim Wise uses a concept he calls illuminated individualism. I'll just say the concept, that 50-cent word, in a very simple way. That if we can recognize both that an individual is shaped by their community, but they are not simply shaped by a community, that they are an individual. If we can recognize that in others, we can recognize that in ourselves. If we can say that, yes, this person is African American, but there is a whole host of other things that is entailed in who they are. It's the same thing in me, being Irish American or Italian American, but I am also working class, etc. If we can recognize both that there's a community that shapes us, but don't be hemmed into those notions that it permits stereotypes, then we can see the humanity in the other individual and see and recognize the commonality in the other individual beyond that difference. And so again, that's why I sort of try to say, we shouldn't simply say it's never about race, but then it's not always about race. And so being able to strike the balance when it is about it, it is an inequality, but there is an opportunity for commonality. And so that's my hope as an educator, and a broader hope as a citizen in terms of fair-minded and good public policy.
You know, an hour and 15 minutes go by so fast, and you don't get a chance to cover everything that you want to talk about. I want to thank our panel. I would go on and on and on with this conversation. And I'm going to penalize Dr. Shaw.
You should.
No. Dr. Shaw, we have a monthly lunch called the Columbia Luncheon Club. It was started in 1963. And that is a place where we sit down and talk about issues. And you normally sit down and talk with someone that maybe don't have the same opinion as you do. Now, my challenge to the greater community is that I would like to see more people of conservative views at the Columbia Luncheon Club. It's the first Friday of every month, except for a month with a holiday, except for this month. Except for next month, September. It will be September 4th? 4th, September 4th. And it's at 12 noon right here in this room. And my challenge to you is I'd like to, John Jones is here. John is the president of our luncheon club. Love for you and John and I and Lynn Hutto in my office to talk about you helping us start some conversations between conservative, liberals, black, white, Hispanic, whatever, Hungarian, whatever, people that go past just a perfunctory, we're having a meal together, but breaking some barriers. So I'll be calling you on that. I'm just,
You can do that.
so, okay. And you will answer, right?
I will.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Will you be here Friday?
Did you hear that? Will you be here Friday? A free lunch. We'll give you a free lunch. How's that? Friday, 12 noon, right here in this room.
You caught me when I'm going to be in San Francisco.
Oh, well, okay,
But
well,
I will
okay.
be, I promise.
I'll send you some
Thank you
things.
so much.
Again, thanks to our panel. I appreciate it so very much. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you so very much. Thank you. I want to mention something, talking about the race discussion and talking about race. St. John Newman Church is having a dialogue around a host of grace dialogues. Race, the power of an illusion. We have some members from St. John Newman Church here. Would you raise your hand? Before you leave, they have some flyers. There's some meetings that will, it's a 3-part PBS document?
3 months.
3 months.
1 month.
Okay. September, October, and November. But please, before you leave, talk with them about it. Hopefully you can participate in it and add to the discussion. I think the more we talk about this, the better off we all are. Thank you again, and good night.